Sri Lanka is scarred. Along the island's east coast, ruins from the tsunami stand as a symbol of the long and bloody road the country has taken in the past 5 years. 8 workers are still building a shelter for Choudhary Kamalanathan and his new family. He lost his wife and 3 children during the tsunami. The house he received to replace his original home was bombed in the war soon after. Kamalanathan has a new wife and 2 children. But the pain remains. Rebuilding his life has proven difficult, and he hasn't been able to find work.
Without a job, I keep suffering mentally. God, what is this test? I lost everything in the tsunami. I lost during the war. I'm left with nothing. What does it matter if I am alive or dead? I've asked God not to allow anyone else to go through this kind of hardship.
2 countries were hit by the tsunami and 2 different tales to tell. In Sri Lanka, the wounds of the disaster had a hard time healing after the war broke out, and these are the monuments of the pain and suffering. At the other side of the Indian Ocean, here in Aceh, Indonesia, the tsunami became the trigger for peace. A 30-year-long conflict was stopped, and the end of the violence became the key to recovery for the Achenese people. Neti Herawati and her husband Sabarudin were not together when the tsunami hit. Sabarudin was a fighter for the Free Aceh Movement, or GAM, and was hiding in the mountains. He was too far away to save their 2 children from the waves that hit the village. But the disaster and the peace deal that followed brought the couple back together. They have a new house and a 2-year-old daughter. Finally, they feel safe.
It would have been so much different without peace. My husband would still be fighting while we lost our children and other relatives during tsunami. Where was I supposed to go? The trauma would definitely become much worse. What peace means to me is indescribable. It's too much to put into words. It's just amazing.
President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono took the lead in peace moves. He admits it wasn't easy. There was a lot of resistance.
I did try to convince the people of Aceh, to convince GAM leadership, to convince the Indonesian parliament, to convince the Indonesian military leaders that this is the best choice in ending conflict in Aceh, to have a peaceful situation. Then we can rebuild Aceh after the tsunami.
A very different decision in Sri Lanka. In 2006, just 1.5 years after the tsunami, a military offensive started against the Tamil Tigers. Those who suffered in the disaster found themselves caught up in the fighting. While Aceh has come a long way since the tsunami 5 years ago, for people in Sri Lanka, like Choudhary Kamalanathan, the healing process has only just begun.
A year ago on the 6th of February, and people came out, they held their mobile phone torches aloft, but there was also real anger and frustration evident in that protest this morning as well, because people are really frustrated at the Turkish government. They blame them for not having carried out a rebuilding process as quick as they would like it to, because people are still living, particularly in the winter, and there's mud on the ground. There was freezing fog this morning that's just burned off, and families are still living in tents and containers, many of them still displaced, with no prospect, really, no hope at the moment of having homes to move into any time soon. Let's talk to Soraya Ali from Save the Children, who joins us live from Amman in Jordan. Soraya, I know you've been producing figures about this, and your estimate is that around 1/3 of children who were displaced a year ago still don't have a proper home to live in even now.
Yes, the last year has been extremely difficult for the millions of people impacted, as you said. 50,000 people killed, 120,000 people injured. In Turkey alone, 2.4 million people displaced. And the data shows that around 1/3 of people and children are still living in temporary settlements. So that's things like tents and containers. And I think that really speaks to the fact that this was not an isolated incident, and people are really still trying to piece their lives back together.
It's notable, isn't it, that those tents and containers that you talk about, I remember them being built here a year ago, and they were only supposed to be a temporary measure. They were supposed to provide temporary respite in the winter, and now they really look very permanent, don't they?
Yes, and I think it's the fact that, the earthquake didn't just destroy buildings, it destroyed schools, hospitals, playgrounds, and children's sense of safety and security were ripped away. We were speaking to an 8-year-old girl in Turkey who said she's still too terrified to be indoors inside a building, even though the containers are just one story, let alone going upstairs or in a multi-story building. And I think that really speaks to the long-term impact that an incident like an earthquake does have on a population.
Halifax has not had, Nova Scotia has not had significant experience with wildfire, and so we are not able to deploy federal resources, call out the Army, for example, without a request from the province, and now that we've received that request, we'll act on it as quickly as possible.
Going back to the outlook for the next couple of weeks and how rough it is, you talk about what we normally get in May in Canada in a year. Alberta alone has dwarfed that with the wildfires they had. What extra steps do you need to take as a government to be ready for what may happen over the next month to 6 weeks as it gets even hotter and drier?
Really important question. One of the announcements actually Minister Wilkinson made this morning, I was with him, is we're investing very significantly in the training of additional firefighters. And one of the things that we've seen in Alberta, Saskatchewan, the Northwest Territories, now in Atlantic Canada and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, is that we need more firefighters who are trained and equipped in order to deal with the emerging threat. The people that are there, the people that are fighting most of those fires in Nova Scotia, for example, are volunteer firefighters. And so we're training hundreds of additional firefighters, and we're doing it as quickly as possible. We also are investing significantly in new equipment because we know they need hoses and other equipment. A lot of the requests we're getting from Nova Scotia, for example, are for vehicles and equipment that they don't readily have available, and so we're moving as quickly as possible, not just to acquire that to deal with the fires we're having today, but recognizing that the challenge presents before us over the next several weeks and even in the coming years, because we're seeing an increase in the frequency and severity of these events year after year. And we know we have to make significant investments, and we're investing in those things. Most importantly, we're working with our provincial and territorial partners and working with communities. I've been talking to mayors across the country to build greater resilience and preparation, and we want to make sure the Canadians know what to do.
Right, but on that point of the frequency and the severity, it's floods, it's hurricanes, it's derechos, it's tornadoes, and it's fires. And each time it's provinces request the Army, it seems, to come in. And we know about the capacity challenges in the armed forces. With where we know things are going with climate change and the frequency of these things, isn't that time to take a serious look at sort of a federal emergency response institution like FEMA, perhaps, in the United States, that isn't the military, because they've got a lot on their plate.
Historically in this country, we have called upon the military, and one of their important functions in the Canadian Armed Forces is what we call domestic response.
Yeah.
They have always been there for us, and we called them out during the
But
pandemic.
should they keep being there for us,
Well,
or do we need to find
well, I
another
think-
organization to do that?
Well, I think we need to continue to invest in their capacity and capability to respond to these requests for assistance, but we're making other investments because the military response is not always the right one. So training additional firefighters, for example, not Canadian Armed Forces firefighters, but firefighters in Indigenous communities, Métis communities, and in provinces and territories across the country. Investing in equipment for those communities so that they have the resources they need so they don't have to call upon firefighters. And we're also investing significantly in civil society, in the Canadian Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and the Search and Rescue Volunteer Association of Canada and St. John's. We've been making significant investments in those organizations to build capacity in those organizations so that they can be there and support. And so it's the Canadian Red Cross, for example, that's staffing and manning a lot of those evacuation centers and helping facilitate those evacuation centers. So it's about building up capacity, not just in the Canadian Armed Forces, but in all of the ways in which we can respond.